Welcome to episode 52 of the Princeton Podcast, produced by the podcast production team at HG Media, providing audio and video production services here in Princeton since 1999. In this episode, our Princeton Podcast host, Mayor Mark Freda, welcomed Rebecca Flemer, co-chairman of the Marquand Park Foundation. Marquand Park is a 17-acre municipal park in Princeton, known for its historical significance and diverse tree collection. Becca detailed the park's history, starting with the land's original ownership by William Penn and its subsequent transfer through notable local families such as the Stocktons, the Browns, and eventually the Marquands. Marquand Park features an arboretum with over 170 different tree species, a popular sand play area, a children's arboretum, a baseball diamond, and picnic areas. The Marquand Park Foundation collaborates with the town to maintain the park, preserve its historic trees, and engage the community through tours, educational initiatives, and events such as Arbor Day and Oaktober. So without any further introduction, let's join our host, Mark Freda, and his guest, Rebecca Flemer, for episode 52 of the Princeton Podcast.
Becca, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me, Mark. I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. So why don't we start with, where is Marquand Park?
Well, if you don't know where Marquand Park is, it's at the corner of Lovers Lane between Mercer Street and Route 206. If you drive down Lovers Lane, you'll see the parking lot.
There you go. So let's tell people, what is Marquand Park?
It is a 17-acre municipal park and a certified level 1 arboretum with over 170 different specimen trees, different varieties of trees in the park. That's the basics of it. We'll get into more details as we go along here.
Yeah, I've got some other great questions.
Yes.
So why don't we describe to people how Marquand Park came to be in existence?
Well, if we go way back, we can go all the way back to William Penn and the William Penn Treaty and the Lenape people who were on the land originally. And William Penn had his tract that he sold to the Stockton family, amongst other families in Princeton. Philip Stockton owned the land, but he was sort of an absentee landlord. Eventually, one of his nephews, whose name was Judge Richard S. Stockton Field, S is for Stockton. So everybody's kind of related in here. He owned the property starting in 1842 and developed it first as his own private estate. And he built a house in the Italianate style designed, and the landscape was designed by John Notman, who is a Scottish architect who designed 4 other houses in Princeton. We'll put a pin in John Notman and come back to him later. Sorry, John. But there's a lot to say about his design, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So Judge Field was a judge, obviously a lawyer. He was educated at Princeton. He made an attempt to start a law school at Princeton. Obviously, that didn't happen. But there's one small building on the grounds of Trinity Church that was his starting point for a law school. So he was an educator. He was a horticulturist. He had greenhouses. He grew grapes and was very, very interested in horticulture. And he had a great collection of trees, some of which are still in the park today, which is really remarkable.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So then in 1871, the property went to Susan Dodd Brown, who was the widow of a wealthy shipbuilder, and she left the bulk of her estate to Princeton University. That's where Brown dorm comes from. She lived there with her son. You can find out more about these histories on our website. We have a blog, and we go into great detail. And she has an interesting story. She also left a bequest to Lincoln University, which is an HCBU. So that's HBCU, I should say. And so that's an interesting tangent there. So after Susan Brown, the property went to the Marquand family. So there were really only 3 owners of the developed landscape. In 1887, Alan Marquand moved in. He was a bachelor. He eventually married Eleanor Marquand. And they were caretakers for over 60 years of the property, and they took very good care of it. And he died in the 1920s, and she was 20 years younger than he was, and she lived into the 1950s. And when she passed away, her daughters decided to leave the property to the borough of Princeton. So it was on the western edge of town. The Marquand Park Foundation works in tangent with the town. It's a town park. But we're a friends group. We support the park in many ways. But that's sort of the chain of title, if you will, of the park. So there's a lot of history, a lot of care, different people who've looked after the land over the years, and a remarkable history, really.
Yeah, it really is. And just the history that you just commented on, for people should really go to the website and look at that. I mean, how interesting to read all that and understand the connections that all those families had in the beginnings of Princeton.
Yeah. When we take people on tours, I like to say that the trees tell a story, and, we'll stop and just be talking about the Marquands, or, there's so much history there, I think, if you get beyond the sandbox. So let's talk about that, right?
Yeah. The next question is, so tell us about some of the amenities in the park.
Yeah, so besides the amazing collection of heritage trees, we have the famous sand play area, sandbox, sandlot, and that attracts so many visitors. I was there this morning. The parking lot was full, and it's toddlers playing in the sand. They love it. So we also have a children's arboretum that we installed a few years ago. There's a baseball diamond for pickup games. Open space, picnic tables. I should note here, if you want to have a birthday party there, you can reserve the picnic tables. If you look on the website, there's a link to do that. So sometimes if there's a tour, the parking lot's full, and you come with all the kindergartners and they can't get a parking spot, it can be disappointing. So I would recommend that to people. And you'll find that link, like I said, on the website, which is marquandpark.org. And there's one porta potty, also essential, but it gets used. We'll say that. We also have a little free library, which is delightful. So people will leave books. It was built on top of the stump of an old tree, a cucumber magnolia, and it's recently been restored a bit. So that's a nice feature. So that's kind of besides the trees. Those are.
Yeah, it's a nice place to walk.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about the foundation, then. About the foundation and what does the foundation do? And
Yeah. I mean, our purpose, we are stewards with the town of the park, and we feel it's our responsibility to preserve this historic integrity of the trees and the plan of the park. We've mapped and labeled the trees. The only structure from Judge Field's time that's inside the park. His house is now in private hands. But inside the park, there's an ice house, and we restored that. We've been doing a planting on the roof of that, so it looks like a little hobbit house. We publish a newsletter updating people about events and what we're doing in the park. You'll find that online. You can sign up to be emailed, or we also mail out the newsletter. I'd already talked about the blog, but that we keep that up to date. There's a recent entry about some trees that somebody donated. That's kind of interesting. And we do historical research, so we're always finding new things about the people that lived there, the trees that are planted there. There's always new things to discover in the park. So that's our mission. We really strive to educate people about trees. It is, if you look at the park as a whole, it's a living encyclopedia. I mean, you can find all types of trees there, evergreens and deciduous conifers, and native trees, exotic trees. We make a big effort not to plant invasive trees, but there are some there surviving from earlier plantings. So that's a lot. We do quite a bit. The foundation's been around as long as the park has been in the town hands. So the Marquand family, we always have a member of the Marquand family on the board, which is great. Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's tremendous that they still stay involved.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I support the foundation? What can I do to help Marquand Park Foundation?
Well, you can go to the aforementioned website. There's a button there if you just want to donate. But if you want to get more involved, we welcome people. We sometimes have volunteers come on Saturday mornings, weather permitting, and pick up sticks or try and clear out some of the invasives. We've had in the past high school students involved. There's always a way to help out, even if you're just there with your child in the sandlot and you see some litter, pick it up, throw it away. every bit helps.
So you had mentioned the town and the foundation work together to maintain the park. So how does that all happen?
Yes, the town, we work together to keep. Everybody wants the park to look nice, and it really does. So the town does a great job. They maintain the fences. They remove large trees that might have fallen or are dead. They do some treatments like the ash tree injections, which sadly we have a few ash trees that are declining, and mowing and maintenance of paths, trash, snow removal. We, as a foundation, we share in the mulch rings around the trees, which helps protect the trees. We don't put too much mulch down. We try and keep that under control. And we preserve the heritage trees, the biggest trees, and try and keep on top of them. I was just in the park, and every beech tree seems to have the new beech disease, and it's really disheartening, but we keep an eye on things.
Yeah, that's a good partnership. It's good to see how, local government and private entities can work together for the good of everybody. So you'd mentioned tours. So tell us more about tours of the park.
Yeah, a couple of times a year, we partner with the Historical Society of Princeton, and we've been doing this with them for a number of years. We usually have between 20 and 30 people, so it's a good-sized tour. Like I said, sometimes the parking lot gets full. But you could look at the Historical Society's website and see when those tours are. And we walk around, we talk about the history, we talk about the trees. It's all tied together in the park. We also partnered with last year with Morven. There's so many connections with the Stocktons, so that was a very interesting project to do with them. And there were more connections than either of us realized, And also with Cadwallader Park, which is a park in Trenton that was also designed by John Notman as a private residence and then became a city park. So we have parallels there that were very interesting to talk about. So we did a tour there, and they did a tour here, and that was a good exchange.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. So and then are there events at the park?
Yes, we have in the spring, we do Arbor Day celebration. Usually the weekend, it's Saturday or Sunday after Arbor Day. We give out seedlings, we have snacks, and then in the fall, for the past few years, we've been doing Oaktober, which is a celebration of the oak. We give out oak seedlings, we have an oak scavenger hunt. Sadly, we have lost a couple of oaks with the bacterial leaf scorch, so we are celebrating them and hoping to plant some more young oaks to replace those. So you can find out about those on the website. It's usually Oaktober, is October, toward the end of the month. And we'd also anticipate doing some more events. Maybe a speaker series is in the works. So that's another thing to catch if you're interested in learning more. There is a film that was produced a few years ago using drone footage. It's quite beautiful, called The Magic of Marquand Park. And you'll see a link to that. It's on YouTube, so you can see that on the website as well.
Oh, that's great. Can you talk more about the collection of trees? I mean, you had mentioned the wide variety of trees, heritage trees.
Well, I could probably talk all day, so I won't do that. But let's talk about just one example, the cucumber magnolia, which is kind of unusual to see. And we have one that probably dates from Judge Field's time, and it has such an interesting structure to it. If you walk from the playground area toward the woods on the top part, sort of closer to Mercer Street, you'll see this tree, and it's a state champion, so it's the biggest cucumber magnolia in the... And, it's just an interesting thing to see. We also have a American chestnut that was bred by the American Chestnut Foundation, so it's doing pretty well. It managed to survive the cicadas, so that looks pretty good, and that's an interesting story. We have a Dawn redwood, a metasequoia, that we believe was grown from seed that was brought back by the Arnold Arboretum and distributed to the arborist at Princeton University. And so we have one of those that dates from the 1950s, probably. And then we have a dove tree, which is unusual. We have a lot of unusual trees that you won't see in other places. So take a look around, and you'll find some real gems. Recently, we lost a big white oak, and I had been talking to a professor at Rider, Daniel Drukenrode, and he does dendrochronology. So he was able to date this tree. He took a sample of the core of the tree and was able to look at the rings, and he dated it to 1766. This is really remarkable. So we think that the old growth forest, that corner of the property, of the park, was originally a woodlot. It shows up on maps that predate Judge Field. So that's some very old trees. And if you go in there, you can see some tulip poplars that are just towering. They probably were never cut. This was probably a lot that was used even before Judge Field for fuel, for fires, and for whatever wood they would need on the farm. So it's tiny little pocket in Princeton, in the middle of Princeton, of old growth forest. A very small area, but really remarkable. And if you go in there, the temperature goes down. Your heart rate, your blood pressure goes down. It's a great place to really experience that right in town. So that's just some of the trees that are notable, and I hope people get a chance to really explore.
Yeah. It sounds like they really should. Something to look for there. So let's talk a little bit about the architecture of the park, because it's not just that, throw a tree here, throw a tree there. I mean.
Right. So the house where the Marquands lived before they donated the park is one of the first Italianate style homes in the country. I had talked before about John Notman. So he was an architect who he settled in Philadelphia, but he kind of brought the Italianate style to America. He was familiar with it from Edinburgh and from London, his work in Edinburgh. And so you'll see there's 4 houses. And here I'll do a shameless plug, because the co-chair at the foundation with me, Evie Timberlake, she and I put together an exhibit that's at the Princeton Library now about John Notman and his Italianate, and also at one Gothic house that are in Princeton. So there's 4 of them. There's Prospect, which is on the university. Lowry also belongs to Princeton University. Springdale, which is the more Gothic-looking house that's at the Princeton Seminary. And then there's Guernsey Hall, which is the house that went with Marquand Park. So these are really, it's remarkable that there's 4 houses still in town that were designed by this architect in the 1840s and 1850s. So he also designed quite a few other villas around, but they're not all standing, so it's nice to... And his original plan for this house, done in 1842, I think, that didn't follow the plan exactly, but it's in the picturesque style. So this is a very English, early British design with curving paths and open vistas, clumps of trees. It's sort of typical from these English estates, and he would have seen that and brought it over as well. You can see in his plan exactly, and the plan is on our website, and you can see it. It's at the library, and it's digitized, so you can really zoom in on that at the Princeton University Library in their special collections. We try and retain a lot of those features, the clumps of trees, so that it was really designed for movement. You would move through, you'd come in on your carriage and come toward the house, and you'd go through a little bit of trees, and then you'd come to an open vista, and all this was sort of to make you expect to see a grand house, which of course at the end you did. And there's still some of those features you can see in the paths, the way they sort of curve around the park and the clumps of trees in certain areas. So that was an important design type in the 19th century. And eventually you'll see it in designs that Frederick Law Olmsted did, like at Cadwallader Park, like Central Park. But Marquand Park's older than that. So I like to tell people that as a designed landscape, it's predates Central Park. I think that's kind of a neat fact.
It's a good point to brag about.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the recent anniversary that was just celebrated for the park and the foundation.
Yes. So the 70th anniversary just this year is happening, and we had a small celebration for thank you for coming, and we had we had 3 members of the Marquand family who were there, so that's nice. They traveled from New York City to join the celebration, and they really like to see what's happening in the park, and we so it's remarkable that we have been able to keep this foundation involved and connected, and we really appreciate that the town works with us on all these initiatives.
Yeah, the celebration was very nice, and it was very nice talking to the Marquand family. I mean,
right.
It's just amazing when you think of how long that connection has existed there.
Yeah,
that's
they are very involved and very interested, and that's a great thing. Yeah.
That was a very nice event. So, what are the foundation's hopes or thoughts for the future of the park?
Well, we are planning for the future. We have been talking. We've planted a small pilot project of a meadow. So we're thinking about more pollinators. We're thinking about less mowing. If this works, maybe we can expand it to a bigger area. We're thinking about what we're planting, native species. But if there's something in the park that is declining and it's not an invasive tree, for instance, we just planted Nordman fir, which is an Eastern European tree, but we've lost a couple of them, so we planted that. But it's not an invasive species, so we're safe with that. So we think a lot about that and for the future, but we want to make sure that we always have this encyclopedia of trees to reference. And so we're continuing to plant, continuing to replace things that are in decline, and thinking about what we want to have. It's a warming area, so sometimes we're thinking about things that we might not have been able to plant 20 years ago, sadly, but it is something to think about in our plans. And we really hope to spark an interest in learning about trees to all the visitors. We are hoping to start some educational initiatives with local school children. That would be on our wish list for the future. We have done that in the past. We'd like to get that going again because it's such a great place to learn. And it's right here, right in town. Yeah. The children that come are usually the toddlers in the sandbox, or maybe they're learning to ride a bike. But we'd love to capture the interest of children who are a little older, who are learning about trees and being able to identify trees. A lot of young teenagers that might not be able to identify a tree. They can identify a video game, but they can't identify a tree. We really want to capture that when they're learning and when they can that becomes part of their memory. I think it's really important for the future of the park and the future of future generations to learn about trees. There's just a lot to know, and here we have this resource right here that we can offer.
And it's a great resource. And I actually remember taking a tour of the park when I was in 4th grade. And the ice house, for some reason, is something that I've always remembered. I mean, I don't know, I don't go to the park every day, but, I've been able to picture in my mind the ice house ever since the day that we went there on that tour in 4th grade. So, so I think it's a great opportunity for people to get children, young people into the park and just take advantage of everything that's there. I mean, it makes a lasting impression.
Yeah. One of the things we talk about with the play area and with the children's arboretum is just letting kids play, letting them take risks, letting them play with the sand, letting them play with sticks and anything that they can pick up, and that's part of the legacy of the Marquands. They were educators, and they were people interested in learning. The Sandlot was designed by Eleanor Forsyth, who was a granddaughter of Alan Marquand. And she taught preschool at the Institute for Advanced Study and took a real interest in child development. And you can see that playing out at the Sandlot. Kids are learning, kids are experimenting, and it doesn't fail. How old is this playground now? It's decades old, and people still come. The parking lot's still full. Oh, yeah. It doesn't go out of date, this learning, and she had a lot of foresight into that kind of learning style and playing and learning at the same time.
Yeah, so. And I think also people that have been in town for a while maybe have figured out that aside from entering the park through the parking lot off Lover's Lane, along Mercer Street, right opposite Springdale, there's one of the trails comes out right there.
Right.
So it's easy you could either, if you're driving, but you don't need to drive, you could easily walk to Marquand Park. But there's a kind of the backside of Marquand Park, and you can come in off of Mercer Street also.
You can park on Mercer Street.
And you can park on Mercer.
It doesn't seem like you can.
It's so easy to park in Princeton.
Exactly. Yeah, I shouldn't be harping on the parking, but it does become a challenge some days. But yes, park on Mercer Street, come in the bottom, then you can the other side of the park, you can get a little different experience too.
Yeah. Take advantage of the entire park. Well, Becca, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. This has been really interesting.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for joining us for the 52nd episode of the Princeton Podcast, produced by the podcast production team at HG Media, providing audio and video production services here in Princeton since 1999. If you enjoyed this episode of the Princeton Podcast, please share it with your friends. Visit our website at princetonpodcast.com. And be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts.